and I'd like to welcome our panel here. So as I said, my name is Sam Kulkarni. I'm a partner at McKinsey. And when David and his team said we're going to do a panel discussion on sitting on a can of miracles, it took me exactly 5 seconds to say yes. I'm like, we are living in this world of unprecedented innovation. Yes, I want to talk about sitting on a can of miracles. And then I was already excited, but then I got doubly excited when I heard who the panelists were going to be. And so I'm very happy to welcome our esteemed panel here, and I will briefly introduce them, and they will do most of the talking. But I will make sure that they don't get into a fight, because I see some debates coming about what the miracles really are. So I'll start on my left here. Ryan Bethencourt, as you can tell from his hoodie, he is the quintessential entrepreneur and disruptor in the healthcare space. At a very young age, he has started a number of organizations. He was a COO and a CEO at biotech companies, but he's also started Berkeley Biolabs and IndieBio, which are new concepts for funding miracles, if you will, or new ideas in the healthcare and biotechnology space. And Ryan's hoping to really disrupt the space in terms of how we come up with innovation. Then we have Amy. Amy Duras is a venture capitalist at GE Ventures, and they have a very sizable fund at GE Healthy Imagination, investing in many different unique new technology concepts. And Amy has a very unique viewpoint. She was at Navigenics, as one of the early on in the whole space of genetics and disruption. She was the primary, I would say, primary investigator, the co-author of the stem cell initiative in 2004 that led to a $3 billion funding in the space to really encourage innovation in the space. And as I was doing my diligence on Amy, someone said she's probably the only English major who sounds like a double PhD. So we'll hear from Amy. So then we have Greg. Greg Simons, the CEO of Polywog, which is a completely new paradigm in healthcare investing, which is, and I won't do justice to it, and I'll have Greg talk about how you actually get people like us investing in private companies and innovation in the futures of healthcare, if you will. And Greg's worn so many different hats. I don't wonder where you keep them all. He was a policy person, chief domestic policy advisor for Al Gore. You were the founding president of Faster Cures. You were at Pfizer as the senior vice president of patient engagement, and now at Polywog.
He was a band leader too. Early on, he was going to be a musician.
All right.
He was.
Well, lucky for us, he made a good choice coming to healthcare. And when I did my diligence on Greg, someone said he should have named his company Polywonka because it's making a lot of things happen.
That's good.
And last, not least, we have Nancy Kelly. Nancy is a senior executive and lawyer, one of the best lawyers in the healthcare space. You have your own firm that you tackle a number of different issues across, regenerative medicine, stem cells, personalized medicine. Very intrigued by, Nancy literally founded the New York Genome Center, raised $110 million to do it, which is a sizable investment into the Genomic Center. Before that, you were at Alexandria Real Estate, for those keeping track, one of the best performing stocks of this year, riding on the biotech wave. She was also a White House Fellow and Truman Scholar. And when I did my diligence, said don't try to make fun of Nancy because she's going to get back at you. You would not want to have a comeback. So I'll stop there. The topic is sitting on a can of miracles, and I think it came from last year's discussion where one of the panelists said, look, we're in an era of unprecedented innovation. We really are sitting on a can of miracles. And so what I'm going to do is try to get from the panelists what they see what are the miracles out there. Is it real this time? And then we'll get into what do you need to actually nurture these miracles. And finally, if you get time, we'll have some advice for entrepreneurs out there from the panelists. So Brian, let me start with you. You guys have through IndieBio, funded 12 companies last year. Can you talk about some of what you see as miracles out there?
So I can talk about some of the miracles that some of the companies have already started to build. So there is one company which is actually removing the need for cotton or fields of agricultural crops to make biotextiles. They actually made their first thread last week. So they made that out of a vat. So they brewed their own biotextiles out of a vat.
The New Silk Road.
Yeah, the New Silk Road. Yeah, exactly. Making vat brewed egg whites. So replacing the kind of inhumane factory farm aspect and making egg whites that are identical to normal egg whites in a vat. All the way through to machine vision and robotics to accelerate kind of the biotech space, something a little more classical. Probiotic therapeutics. That are genetically modified, so protein factories for the developing world, where getting the therapeutics is actually really hard because they're proteins and they have to be chilled, and it's really hard to do that last mile delivery or the last 100-mile delivery, and pretty much a full range. So pretty much everything in the space, starting off at the kind of technical hurdles that we're facing and how we scale up to some of the higher level issues.
And these are entrepreneurs who are, not with 25 years of experience. They're new entrepreneurs who are starting companies with small innovation funds.
Yeah, we're very mission driven. So when people apply to IndieBio, they come with a mission, usually a passion. Many of them are younger entrepreneurs, but not all of them. Some are actually university professors. Some are biohackers. Some are postdocs who've been stuck in the lab trying to get out and do something different. And they all have ideas and visions, and with stagnant government financing, many VCs shying away from taking early risk, we're one of the few actually funding the first money into essentially an idea.
Yeah. Speaking of VCs who are not shying away, Amy, can you talk about some of the investments you guys have made and what you see as really cutting edge and novel innovation?
Sure, absolutely. So in addition to being a corporate VC with essentially usually later stage kind of follow-on approach to the market, we also have a separate group that just focuses on starting new businesses. So wholly independent of GE. GE is usually an investor. Always there's a strategic reason to GE for starting the company. So we just launched our first company, Evidation Health, which is a digital health validation engine. Was just launched at South by Southwest. So we see ourselves more as enabling the next generation of miracles. We think there will be some miracles on the digital technology front. We're also spending a lot of time in cell and gene therapies and tissue engineering, the whole regenerative medicine space, which is near and dear to many of our hearts here on the panel. We think that this field in general, particularly cell and gene therapy, is ripe for industrialization. When you think about how you optimize manufacturing process, this is mass customization. These autologous therapies are individual cells then re-injected back into the body. So we think there's a lot of opportunity for optimizing the manufacturing of that process and how we take our learnings from jet engine production and apply it across all of the manufacturing components, from the actual patient engagement all the way at the front end of the therapy, all the way down through to dose administration and monitoring for toxicity, and employing all the sort of Internet of Things technologies, if you will, and the Six Sigma that we have as a company, that sort of competency. So we're really interested in funding both the point solutions around these technologies and some of the therapeutics as well, as well as the sort of underlying manufacturing pieces. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Think of GE, you think of airplane engines, you think of, big appliances, and here you are, at the cellular level thinking about regenerative medicine, but it's very interesting. So Greg, you have a vantage perspective as you created your fund to look at all these different technologies out there, and I think you called it a regenerative medicine fund that you created. Can you talk about what you're seeing, in terms of innovation, and why you picked this particular area to be the fund you create?
Well, Polywog's mission is to turn health from a cost to an asset. Insurance is a lousy way to pay for your health. Eventually, people need to own the factors of production in health so they can make money from investing in the future of health, which they then use to pay for their own health costs. So in order to do that, you have to verticalize the health sector. Unlike energy and agriculture, which have been verticalized forever, in health it's either big cap pharma or small cap biotech. But that's not how people think about their health. They have Alzheimer's, or they have a kid with autism, or they have a sister with MS. And yet when they go to invest, that's not how the market is organized. So as an example, when Biogen last week reported interesting results on a drug that may not even be approved for the next 7 years in Alzheimer's, their volume of traded shares went from 1 million to 10 million, and their market cap went up $10 billion. Wow. Did all those people invest in Biogen? No. They invested in Alzheimer's. Why? They don't know how else to invest in Alzheimer's. So we're creating a series of public venture funds because we think it's important to democratize access to health investing. It's not just for the rich. That's how you build wealth, not just by paying people more, but letting them invest. And we're creating a series of vertical funds. The first one's in regenerative medicine and stem cells. The second one's in neurodegenerative diseases. We'll do them in cardio and metabolic disease and infectious disease, different kinds of cancer, because that's what people want to invest in. One statistic that shows you how underinvested people are in health. There are $14 trillion invested in mutual funds and exchange-traded funds in America. Of that number, only $180 billion is invested in health. There's more invested in gold. Now, that is one of the problems about the can of miracles, is that if we've gotten all these miracles with the paltry amount of money we've invested so far, imagine what we could do if we actually let the public start investing in the things they care about, instead of just the VC community, which even if it's perfect, is only $8 billion, investing in a $3 trillion economy of health. So we picked regenerative medicine and stem cells for the reason that Jean Loring said this morning. We've been waiting for this for 10 years. Amy's been incredibly involved in that. And it is now, the dam has burst, and it is happening. And we want people who care about it to be able to invest in it directly.
Yeah, you know what, when we spoke on the phone, what you said struck me, which is the ice bucket challenge. When that happened, you saw a spike in investment in ALS, right?
Right. People focused on the $200 million of donated money. What they didn't look at was that all the companies who said they were working on ALS stock went up that week. People don't just want to be donors and spectators, they want to be investors. My father was scared to death of the market. I had a broker and I bought mutual funds. My son is trading options online. The millennials don't just want to invest through a broker and own a stock. They want to own a company. And that's what they should have the chance to do.
Yeah. So Nancy, you've put large amounts of monies to work in the New York area in creating these, the infrastructure, I guess, to enable future innovation. Can you talk about the the Genome Center, what your vision is, and what you also do a lot of synthetic biology, you're involved in that field. What are the innovations you're seeing coming out of it?
Yeah, so with the New York Genome Center, I mean, really the vision was to bring 11 of the largest academic and medical institutions in the world together. Collectively, they have about 30 million patients going through their doors every year. And by sequencing those patients and being able to merge that data and then search it to look for variations and patterns, it should lead to the development of new drugs and diagnostics. But even more fundamentally important, New York is the most ethnically diverse population in the world, or it has it. And there are no reference genomes for most of those ethnic population groups. And so by working in the New York area with the people who live in that city, there was really the possibility, or there is the possibility, of creating genomic medical approaches that are tailored to ethnic populations. And that is really important because it will allow genomic medicine to come to underserved people for the first time.
And how does this fit with the President's initiative around the million people sequenced and something bigger than what you're trying to do, or does that all fit in together?
It all fits in together. I mean, at the national level, the Precision Medicine Initiative is really all about obtaining people's unique genetic blueprints so that you can understand what diseases they're susceptible to getting And then once they get them, what medications are going to be effective at treating them and getting them healthy again. And that's what precision medicine means, and it's what the President's Initiative is all about, and it's what we were trying to do in New York City.
Great. So let's come back to whether this is real. So again, as I was doing my diligence for this panel, I spoke to someone who's been doing biotech for 50 years now, who said, the last time someone said sitting on a can of miracles, there was a person who called me about investing in an East Mongolian gold mine this morning, said the same thing. And we've seen this movie play over several times. And Amy, you saw this Navigenex in 2000. You guys saw this from the policy perspective. Ryan, you're so young. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah, I've actually seen it repeated. Well, the genomics, I did see that.
Yeah.
I actually saw the kind of hype and crash.
Yeah. So is it real? Is it real this time? And why?
Well, every morning I get about 10 articles. It's a bubble. It's not a bubble. It is not a bubble for several good reasons. Number one, if you look at the biotech and NASDAQ ramp up now compared to what it was in 99 and 2000, it is nowhere near as steep as it was in the NASDAQ for the dot-com era. In the dot-com era, people were measuring success by eyeballs. In the biotech bubble, we're measuring success by people who are being cured. The hepatitis C drug, the immunotherapies in leukemia, in stomach cancer, and lung cancer. So there's no comparing somebody page views versus people getting cured. The other thing about biotech is products are not substitutable. If you have a petfood.com and there were 60 of them in the .com bust, they're all substitutable for each other. If you have the new Hep C drug, it is not easily substituted by anything else. So biotech, unlike tech, is not a question of somebody else's garage has a better app 6 months from now. We know, because it's all public, what the pipelines are at the FDA. And when there are a whole series of drugs and products in development for different diseases, when those hit, they are valuable, regardless of what else is going on. And just like oil used to be a problem when the cost went up, and now it's a problem when the cost goes down. Have you wondered why that is? It's because oil used to just be a cost, and now it's an asset. When health becomes an asset, the money we spend on health going up will not be a problem, because everybody will be owning the factors of production and the products that are curing them, rather than just thinking of themselves as insurance victims. And it will make a huge difference. This is not at all like the dot-com bubble, which I definitely went through.
Yeah. Well, Amy, let me ask you this, since you were so close to stem cell regeneration. I think in 2000 or 2001 with Geron, we saw videos of mice. This morning, I don't know if people saw the video of mice whose spines were crushed and then they were running around. I don't know who showed the video, but we saw that 10 years ago, right? And then what happened? It did not work. So why is this time do we have better understanding?
There's essentially a valley of death in the funding. It gets back to the funding. That became an issue. Geron lost its funding. They've now actually recouped some of the funds, and a version of that trial is moving forward, albeit slowly, more slowly than it should have from its initiation. But I think it's largely a funding challenge. I mean, we at GE, we're so focused on the enabling technologies. We're not a therapeutic company, but you see just even within the genomic revolution that the actual advances in the technology are in excess of Moore's law, and so we have just continued to accumulate these masses of data, and so now we're actually able to mine that data more carefully. It's just that we haven't had the funding on the discovery side, and sort of the continuity of funding hasn't always been there in the last decade. NIH budgets have shrunk. We don't have other instruments until Polywog and others have come along to really try to democratize the funding and smooth out the lumps. I mean, I think that's really the underlying problem as far as I can see.
So it's the funding, and now there's better funding, so we're seeing this real uptick. But is there something on science? Is there something that's changed? Nancy,
Yeah, I was going to say that I think in addition to that, that we're seeing the return of a huge investment in a technological foundation for understanding the way that life unfolds that, we hadn't seen before. We didn't have the benefit. So it started in 2003 with the sequencing of the first human genome. And then since then, as the speed and cost of not only sequencing but synthesizing DNA has come down, you've seen not only, the opening for precision medicine to enter the marketplace, but also synthetic biology. A whole new area of science with applications that are far beyond the healthcare boundaries.
So the
Brian, do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's the biology of everything now, right? Steering away from, and we've heard from some earlier panelists and some earlier talks, we're steering away from just biomedical applications of biotech to everything. So, as an example, one of the companies we've invested in, Arcturus BioCloud, they will enable consumers to get biobricks and kind of like iGEM.
Sorry, what are biobricks?
So biobricks are pieces of DNA that encode for a particular protein or an enzyme. It does something, right? So kind of like Legos, but for biology, you can start putting them together, right? And you can actually do this in the cloud-based science, right? And you can actually start making things. And so they've already started their beta testing, right? So this is real, like right now. Right, and so these are the types of things that we're going to start to see. We're using Pembian is using synthetic rhino horn to combat poaching, right? So we're looking at like how do we look at the world as it is, and how do we change it for the better? How do we feed people? How do we provide clean water or new biomaterials? And then eventually, like, how do we heal them? Right?
Yeah. So Ryan, you're trying to create this, you call it Valley of Death, and how you get across it. There's the early funding because people have ideas, whether you want to have grow a plant that's glowing or something else that we heard in the previous panel. And it's the early $1 to $2 million funding. But let me challenge you, which is what Greg's saying is we're not talking millions of dollars here. We're talking about there's only $180 billion, whereas it should be $1 trillion or $2 trillion in this market. How is your bottom-up way of trying to get across this chasm, if you will, or mini-chasms, how is that going to solve the problem?
Because we're no longer stuck in the box of biomedical innovation, right? So biomedical innovation has a box, and there are certain VCs that are typically risk-adverse, and they cut checks, and their check sizes are $5 to $20 million. If you can't get to 5, you can't get to that point where they invest. Typically a phase 1B, 2 typically in clinical testing, you're not going to get funded, right? And usually you're low risk, right? Like usually you're a drug that's been proven, you know how the mechanism works, and then it's easy for a big firm to cut a check. And there are a bunch of them in Silicon Valley that cut big checks. They're billion-dollar funds, usually billion-dollar plus funds. We're doing other things. We're actually going direct to consumer. We're selling to consumers. We're innovating in spaces where other people don't. So we're bringing the tools of molecular biology into spaces that typically wouldn't use them.
I don't know if you have too much competition in rhino horns. It does sound like you found some niches areas there.
It's controversial, right? It's controversial, but what if it works? Right? Then could we use that model in other areas too? Right? I'm a vegan, right? Why isn't there in vitro meat? Right? And these are the questions that we can answer with biology.
So, Amy, your take on from a VC perspective on this?
Yeah, I think not so much in the sort of regenerative medicine space, but certainly on the digital technology side, some of these valuations are so stratospheric that, typically corporate VCs play later, and it's just the returns analysis are very difficult when you think about going in. We just saw a company that came in the other day. They have a great service, kind of very disruptive service. They're disintermediating payers, all the things we love. But, their valuation is $800 million on $3 million in revenue, and they said it with a straight face, and they actually said that a hedge fund gave them a over $1 billion valuation, and they rejected it. So, this is the kind of, you see this really on a weekly basis in our shop, so it's very hard, either going to play really early, and to your point, you're going to do sort of dribs and drabs of funding, a very high risk, or you're going to go in on the BC, even D stage, and it's very difficult to make a returns analysis work out. So, I think we're all waiting for the crash. It's going to come, and the pundits tell us, when they think, depending on whom they are, and I think this I think we need a correction because it does make it very difficult in the absence of, many other instruments or approaches to funding. It makes it difficult as a venture funder to find that sweet spot where your status, especially as a corporate VC, where you have these other kind of constraints from the street, that you can really make an analysis work.
But Greg, you don't think there's going to be a crash. You think this is real, right?
I think the biotech is real.
Yeah.
Digital health does not always go together. A lot of things are digital, have nothing to do with health. I'm sorry. Wearing your Fitbit at Dunkin' Donuts is not a digital health product. So my plea to the Valley is stop trying to make us live 200 years and help us live at home until we die. Mm-hmm. Think about it. Would you rather live 200 years, or would you rather just be able to spend the last days of your life at home instead of in a facility or a nursing home and all the things that the boomers have seen their parents do, which we refuse to want to do? And so to do that, to stay at home, we're going to have to invest in things that make the quality of life better. Mm-hmm. And for that, there is no bubble, because the boomers are the most selfish generation in history. We're turning 65, 10,000 a day for the next 18 years, and the millennials are turning 35, 10,000 a day for the next 18 years, which is going to create an enormous bull market because they're coming into the equity buying age. And the point being is, if you're in the investment business and you're looking at the demise of energy, and you're looking at the demise of the EU and Greece and all of that, where are you better going to invest than here? And what sector is more interesting and more exciting than health? So I think the digital health thing has gotten a lot of hype. And Bruce Booth at Atlas Ventures has written a tremendous series of blogs, one of which pointed out that in the digital space, there's tons of money for the beginning of a lot of companies, but there's not a lot of money for the end stage buyout. In biotech, there's a ton of money, we call it pharma, for the buyout, but there's not been a growing piece of capital for the startup. Mm-hmm. Why? Because we don't have the capital market tools to allow the average investor to invest in a diversified portfolio of early-stage companies. So a year ago, Polywog started an index to measure 75 companies with a drug in a phase 2 or 3 trial, under $5 billion market cap, with 2 years of cash. It became an ETF, an exchange-traded fund, on New Year's Eve. It's up 20% this year. It's added $5 million of assets every week, with no marketing, no sales, and no PR. Why? Because retail investors, many of whom couldn't even buy it through their bank until it hit $25 million, wanted to invest in small companies, and all the other ETFs are just another way to buy Pfizer. All the other ETFs are dominated by the top 10 big pharma companies. So you give people an opportunity to invest in the future, they will take it. But Polywog, J.P. Morgan. Who would you expect to do this? It should have been J.P. Morgan, but it's Polywog. Sooner or later, it'll be J.P. Morgan's idea.
Yeah.
It's really important not to forget, though, that we're not talking about just the U.S., right? I mean, we're talking about 7 billion people on this planet, most of whom don't have enough food. Like, most of whom, GMO technologies are really important. That's how they eat, right? In India, they celebrate the original genetic modification pioneers, right? Whether it's traits or other things. So it's there's a huge global market. There may be 300 million people in the U.S., maybe another 500, 600 million in Western Europe. That's not even a majority.
It's interesting you bring that up, Ryan, because there was a panel earlier this morning on food and beverage, and I think it was Jim who mentioned, which is, you do the Tesla model where you try to solve the problems of the U.S. and it'll flow down. But if you try to create a completely different solution, it may not always be adopted. But then that's a different, good point, but it's a different debate to have.
No, we don't view it that way, right? Yeah. And we view it like if the financial markets won't work, right, you find a way. I mean, many of us are biohackers, right? We'll find a way to do it, and we'll make the technology available, right? Whether it's open source or whether we'll just sell it for pennies, right? Yeah. Maybe those pennies matter.
So getting away from funding for a little bit and coming back to science. Nancy, when we spoke, you said, the can of miracles. There's a lot of things here. There's synthetic biology, epigenetics. There's gene editing, there is, I can't even say all the things that you mentioned, but let me do a rapid fire round here for the panel. If you had to invest in one of these technologies, only one, you can only pick one, whether it's personalized medicine, synthetic biology, regenerative medicine, gene editing, I know they're all related, but pick one, and then you got to have a bold prediction for what the technology is going to do 10 years from now. Who wants to start? Do you want to start?
I would say engineering biology rather than synthetic biology because it's a broader category. And I think that it's going to introduce solutions to many of the global problems that we're facing in agriculture, energy, health, environment, etc.
Which explains the valuation of Intrexon and some of the companies like that, right? So engineering biology, okay. Greg?
I would go with neuroscience, because if we don't solve the Alzheimer's problem, every hospital in the country is going to be filled with hospital patients in 20 years, with Alzheimer's patients in 20 years. We have got, when President Obama proposes, and I'm a yellow dog Democrat, when he proposes $60 billion to subsidize community colleges with lousy graduation rates and $100 million for Alzheimer's research, please. I mean, the biggest threat to the country right now is Alzheimer's and dementia. And if we don't throw tons of money at that, we're not going to solve it. You heard Casey this morning. I get 10 articles a day about what people are doing in new trials for Alzheimer's. We can do it. Mm-hmm. Most people will argue that we can't do it. We can do it, but not at $100 million from the government. It has to reach a huge scale. And the brain is the most difficult thing to figure out on purpose. Your brain is designed not to let people go in there and reprogram it. Mm-hmm. So if you have a brain problem, it by definition is the most difficult problem. That's what I think is the most exciting stuff.
Are you asking as an investor or as a sort of consumer?
No, it could be an entrepreneur wanting to make a bet and develop something in the space. It's not just an investment.
Well, it's really expensive, but I think autologous cell and gene therapy is where it's at, because the data coming out of these phase 3 and there are a couple phase 4 trials overseas, it's curative. And I think,
just to explain to the audience what autologous
this is where you
are.
Essentially, it's the sort of CAR T or T-cell, other T-cell immunotherapy. It's basically you take a person's own cell and you reprogram it to then go back inside the body, this patient's own body. There's no autoimmune rejection, and attack tumors, or tumor cells. So it's pretty amazing, and it's been in development for 30 years. It's not a new concept, but we've just finally got to the point where the technology has really actually supported the thinking around it. So, and we're curing cancer in these trials. Carl June at the University of Pennsylvania, it's phenomenal what the data is telling us. So that's why our company is making such an interested investment, and we're trying to really enable the underlying manufacturing technologies, because right now they're producing these therapies in 10s and 20s, because these are the sizes of the trials, more or less. And how do you get, when you're sort of ready, you get through approval, how do you kind of push go and make sure that you're taking care of the millions of cancer patients out there? So
yeah, so for those in the audience who have not kept up with this autologous T-cell space, this is mind-boggling. And we went and saw a patient in a clinic, which is you take a person's immune system or cells, re-engineer it, put it back into the person's body, or there's different ways to do it.
Yeah.
The person who has cancer can't move, and has all sorts of sequelae. All of a sudden gets this fever. It feels like, oh my God, this person's going to die. This sweating, fever, 48 hours. Then the cancer is eaten up. This is very, it was quite mind-boggling when I saw it in real life versus reading it in papers, and I definitely can see how this could be quite shaking. Yeah. Right.
Mine is nuanced. So, so vascularization. That's where I would invest, and that's where I would like to see progress, like actual vascularization. So what I mean by that, and it's really important to clarify what I mean by that, is I mean the ability to grow capillaries and blood vessels within tissue. Right? And so this is actually one of the biggest stumbling blocks for organogenesis, printing, creating new organs. It's one of the biggest stumbling blocks we have for in vitro meats. It's a really important key that everyone is waiting for, right? I'm sure in GE
No, absolutely.
Similar kind of issue, right? Like once you can vascularize tissue, then you can start to imagine what you can do with these tissues. Once you can grow tissue, you can grow mammalian tissue, fish, every species of tissue, then you can start to do really unusual things with it, like growing organs or maybe growing new biomaterials.
I think Nina Tandon is speaking later today.
Yeah, there we go. That's good. Is that?
She gets to tell you more about vascularization. It is the sort of missing link. When
you get a high five.
Phenomenal structures that are being engineered in tissues from hollow structures all the way to organoids and full organs like kidneys that have been in patients for 5 years, fully functioning. It's remarkable what's possible. But again, if you get to the mass customization problem, again, it's how do you actually keep these tissues living when they're ex vivo before they're transplanted, and it is a real stumbling block, certainly before we can industrialize.
And Ryan, just for the audience, is this like growing, heart tissue? Is this like growing
everything?
Retinal tissue?
This is growing everything. So everything from modern meadows leather, right, which is dependent on vascularization to grow thicker tissues, all the way through to growing tissues to replace burn victims, skin cells, through to replacing hearts, and then replacing animals in the food chain.
Right. So if Polywalk comes up with an ETF called vascularization,
I'm totally investing.
You're running it. You're not in.
Oh, I'm running it. Okay, that sounds good.
We'll open up to the audience in a second here, but one thing I wanted to cover, since we have all the policy experts here as well. Again, rapid fire. If you had the power to change any policy you could today to enable innovation, one policy, pick that, and what would you change? So start with you, Ryan.
I would make all FDA testing voluntary. All FDA testing regulations voluntary. And the reason I say that is I think that we've become too risk adverse when it comes to testing new therapies. And I think that educated people should be allowed to take risks. I've worked with people who have died of ALS. One of my last companies was Halpin Neurosciences. My investor died of ALS. He couldn't get access to drugs. Or experimental drugs, and so I'd push for that.
That was an example this morning of someone who went to Tijuana and got stem cell therapy, right, and it worked. Amy, what would you change?
I think the reimbursement problem continues to be such a bugaboo, and if you could actually kind of use health economics and think about cost avoidance when you're thinking about what's the overall kind of what should the reimbursement rate for some of these really transformative curative technologies like autologous cell and gene therapies. I think that's a fundamental kind of disconnect. We have lots of disconnects in the healthcare system. Our incentivization is all misaligned. There's a lot of problems. But if you could just think, okay, what are we actually, from the patient's point of view, how are we helping this patient, both in terms of course, first their quality of life and their longevity, but how are we also helping them and everybody who supports their care, including the payers and employers and all the people who are invested, their providers. How do we actually think about the total equation? And then translate, because back to...
I'm sure Greg will disagree with that because that makes it a cost. But anyway.
Not an asset, right.
I would eliminate any regulation that uses wealth as a proxy for wisdom.
Okay.
And the good news is it's already been done. Congress passed the Jobs Act in 2012. The SEC, scared to death by consumer groups who don't want people to invest their own money their own way, is telling people that the average investor isn't smart enough to know how to invest their money. Don't let them. They can buy lottery tickets, $83 billion a year. They can be parents. They can drive. They can buy a gun. But they can't invest in a startup company if they're not wealthy. That needs to get changed. Congress changed it. The SEC has refused to implement the regulations. Why? I mean, this is nuts. Because the problem is letting people invest in what they care about, not just donate. Donations are great. I ran an organization around the growth of donations. But people want to invest where they donate. They don't just want to be a spectator.
Yeah, good. Nancy?
I think that I would change the way that we fund basic and applied research in the government. I think David said earlier this morning that last year I was here and I gave an alarmist presentation. I actually think it was more cautionary. But the truth of the matter is that we actually don't have a rational way for the United States government to identify important trends that are occurring in science, and then in an interagency basis to be able to evaluate and target investment in ways that will advance that sector year over year over year and allow us to measure the return on that. And until that's done, we are in danger of falling behind because other countries are applying that methodology.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Open up to the audience. Any questions?
DARPAify.
Is there,
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead. Is there a microphone?
Right here. Okay.
Right in front.
So, great panel. I mean, excellent point of views and the divergence and convergence of them. So, thank you so much. Your comment on vascularization sort of preceded my question.
Okay.
Is 3D organs.
Yes.
I mean, we know there's a huge need in the world. And yes, we lag behind because of what Nancy said, the inability of the government to create programs to identify where the state of the art is and how can we feed into that economic and market intelligence, right, and public health issues. And so can you go back and talk about why we haven't looked into this in the past and promote these 3D organs much more? And what's your estimate? What's your
we have, and I'll start off. I know GE, by the way, GE is a huge proponent of stem cells and eventually the path that goes down to it, which is organogenesis, so 3D printed organs or grown organs. But we have looked into it. So I was at the X Prize Foundation. I looked deeply into organogenesis. There are many researchers right now working on that challenge globally. This same stumbling block keeps coming up, like vascularization, right? So there are other issues, right? Do we really know the stem cells? When we look at a stem cell, do we really know what that stem cell actually is? Right? How do we identify that? Is that really, the fifth type of kidney cell or not? Right? Identifying is really difficult. So we have to improve in our ability to understand the core, the basic science behind building organs. And it sounds like you had a...
Yeah, so are you talking about the lack of appropriate bioinks and also scaffolds? I mean, those are two other ends of this problem.
All of the above. All of the above. Because so even growing on a scaffold, right? So let's say today, right? There are researchers at Harvard, George Church, and various others who have grown hearts, right? They've actually revascularized. You basically take a scaffold, you strip it of cells, you revascularize, you put heart cells, human heart cells, and you pump blood through it. What happens? It bleeds, right? It just goes, the capillaries don't stand up to the pressure. There's something that we don't quite understand. Some groups have claimed that they've been able to get better and better at it. But we're still, we don't know what's going wrong. Like, we're trying to fix it. There are very, very smart people that have spent, one researcher over at Yale, Laura, she spent 20 years trying to answer this question. Right? So if we could have more concerted focus and investment in this area, I think we could do incredible things. And then what happens next, right? Once you can start replacing failing organs, then you start tackling all sorts of diseases, and maybe you will get, to live 120 or 200 years, because you're not going to die of heart failure. You're not going to die of kidney failure, right? Like, in the U.S. alone, like, people are dying all the time because they're on dialysis, and so they're on a slow train to death. Right?
That will definitely bankrupt Medicare. Why don't we do, unless there are other questions, another question from the audience?
I would just say on the tissue engineering side, the discovery's been so siloed today, at least in this country. There's better collaboration and overseas in some pockets, but Tony Atala, who's down at Wake Forest, for example, has a big initiative that is really kind of federating all of these various academic centers of excellence and starting to share data and best practices and different methodologies around trying to really solve the gaps, particularly around vascularization. But I think, it's a very complex problem, and we've sort of got it figured out on the hollow structures, urinary conduit, some of these very early kind of installations, but as you move down the spectrum of complexity and you get to full, organoid or full organ replacement, it's been done with the kidney, as I'm sure you're aware, but it is so highly complex. We just have I think, unfortunately, a long road to go.
All these structures are so exquisitely complex. It's the most complicated machinery on this planet, right? There's nothing more complicated. Like technology makes technology, AI looks simple, right?
There's another question out there.
Yeah, hi. Greg, your hypothesis that the average person cannot invest in the early stage or in biotech, could you talk more about it? It's a fascinating hypothesis. You mentioned how there's some roadblocks with the SEC, some obstacles. How could it go forward?
So since 1974, you had to have a net worth of $1 million or an average salary of $200,000 a year to invest in a private company. Mm-hmm. Worse, the First Amendment didn't apply to you if you were raising money for a private company. You couldn't, before 2013, when the regulation, this part was done, if I stood on the stage and said that Polywog was a private company raising money and here is the term sheet, I'd go to jail, right? Now, I could talk about the 7 deadly sins, and I could say awful things about the president, but if I said I want you to invest in a private company and I didn't know if you were wealthy, I'd go to jail. So that has changed so that I can now advertise that private companies raising money to the world. But only people who have $1 million in net assets are allowed to invest, even today. So the Jobs Act that passed in 2012 said, we need to let everybody invest, and initially we'll cap it at a certain percentage of their income if they're under $200,000, and a company can only raise $1 million, which is a ridiculous limit put on there by the consumer groups. So why is that ridiculous? Wealth inequality is about who can invest and who cannot. Since '74, when only the wealthy could invest in private companies, the wealthy have acquired $35 trillion of wealth, and everybody else has acquired $15 billion of debt because they couldn't invest to build wealth. They had to borrow money to get a new car, a better college, or a better house. So now we need to start letting everybody invest. And the argument that people are too stupid, they can't afford it, etc., is ridiculous when you consider that it is the government that promotes lotteries. It's the government that promotes lotteries, and they never tell you, by the way, your chance of getting anything is a snowball in hell. On the New York subway, it doesn't say, buy the New York lottery ticket, here are the risks. But when I put out a prospectus, 90% of it is, here's the risk if you invest. This is upside down. This is completely upside down. People need to be able to put their money where their interests are. And yes, some people will lose their money. But the wealthy have done very, very well by being able to invest in private companies that nobody else could invest in. If you can buy Facebook at $38 at the IPO, why can't you buy it at $1 when it's an early stage company? The public ends up giving the wealthy $38 a share for something they paid $1 for that the public couldn't buy. This is why the wealthy are wealthy. No, I don't blame them, you know. But why shouldn't the public be able to buy Facebook at $1?
Good. I think we're out of time. But you know, I want to thank the panelists here. You know, I hope that we're sitting here next year saying, gosh, the miracles are happening. You know, the funding challenge has been solved. The policy challenges have been solved. But time will tell. But please give a big round of applause to the panelists. Thank you for coming out here.